I think now, I mean, I think of the war on drugs, it was done with enthusiasm for about the first 30 years. So if we see, Richard Nixon kicked it off in 71, and he had Reagan really got into it in a big way. And then we had, under Clinton as well, there was still really kind of into this. And I think it kind of died, or the kind of American politicians kind of after about 9/11. Since then, and even with the latest opioid epidemic in the United States, there isn't really enthusiasm for like war on drugs anymore. That's more said by us critics than by the actual, and even, I've had an email, I've been reached out by some people in the Washington drug office. Can we start having, maybe have some conversations? And I think there's people there, they're not really enthusiastic about these policies anymore, but it's more like a zombie war on drugs. It kind of keeps stumbling on anyway. It's still like, and there are some, genuine problems, like what do you do about heroin? How can we deal with heroin? We're going to keep on fighting and allow this illegal market on heroin to make all these gangsters rich who are then murdering people and then working like paramilitaries and then, disappearing 43 students in Guerrero. Or are we going to establish shops where people can sell heroin? But then that gets kind of messy. So I'm totally against the war on drugs conceptually and in favor of drug policy reform. Accepting that the current policies don't work and but then we do need to get to a hard conversation about how we would create a world with drugs where, what can be legal, what can't be legal, but like we have to try and figure out a better way of helping addicts and helping people with drug problems.
It's sort of the way, though, that I think about, anything that is massive change that we're always sort of like 3 steps ahead, and we're like, yeah, buddy, but let's do step 1. If you're like, what are you going to make gas cars illegal to stop climate change? I was like, no, not yet. But let's do the first, let's stop digging fracking wells that is, contributing to climate change. Like, let's do no harm. And it seems like the drug war is similar. It's like, oh, you're just going to, legalize everything and then heroin's everywhere. It's like, no, but like we can do better right now. There are bodies already dropping and people already dying from what is currently going on, to say nothing of the drugs themselves, but of the way that they are trafficked. And I guess I just wanted to ask you, when it comes to the drug war, the war on drugs, which I love that you talk about how that morphed, and the amount of money that not only comes through, like, sure, there's weapons dealers, independent folks, stores, manufacturers. What about the U.S. military? What about the money we've put into military support? And how did that weaponry end up supporting the cartels themselves? Yeah,
sure. So you had this murder initiative, which was, you had Plan Colombia, and that was the US pumping a bunch of money into the Colombian military. Now, really, Plan Colombia was sold to the American public or, to Congress as being against drugs and drug cartels, but really it was about hitting down a leftist insurgency in Colombia. It was about hitting the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia, the FARC. And it kind of succeeded in knocking down the FARC, but drug trafficking carried on, and cocaine still comes out of Colombia. It's still snowing everywhere. Europe's going crazy for cocaine right now. Huge market. The United States still taking a lot of cocaine. The Americans now are into crystal meth and heroin and fentanyl, a bunch of other stuff. So, and then it comes to Mexico, and you have the Murder Initiative, which starts around 2006, 2007, and it is under President Felipe Calderón. Now, I interviewed him about this. In fact, an interview for the latest book. I sat down and talked about this and about various things with the guns and so forth. And it was actually Mexico's idea. He says it wasn't actually the US imposing this. Like the US did a lot before. If you go back to the 80s, the US would like impose on countries, say, unless you do what we say against drugs, we're not going to certify you and we're going to punish you. So we're going to push you into. But in the 2000s, a bit different. Felipe Calderón went to the US and said, we can, hit these cartels. You've got to take responsibility because it's Americans buying all these drugs. So give me a bunch of funky gear. He said, I want all of the stuff I see in the program 24, on the TV show 24. I want all of that gear. This is what he said. He said to George
and Kiefer, throw in Kiefer Sutherland too, please. You're like, take him, why not?
Take him. So they got all this stuff. Black Hawk helicopter was wiretap gear. Now the problem is the Mexican military. I mean, first you have the problem that then the Mexican military, some of them are working with drug cartels.
Right.
So they're using all this funky gear they've got, but to kill rival drug cartels. And then even when they're not working with rival drug cartels, they're committing massacres all over the place. So, and then some of them are just, selling the guns to the cartels. So it gets very, very messy.
Yeah, and we obviously saw that play out in Ayotzinapa. I mean, in Guerrero, in Iguala specifically, with the 43 students who disappeared, and we knew that the mayor and his wife were involved with the drug cartels, and that's still sort of an open mystery as to exactly what happened and why they targeted them. But yeah, I mean, the police state. What's interesting is that the police, I mean, and everyone knew it, are not reliable actors. So funneling massive amounts of machinery and money into them is not going to get you anywhere. It might make things actually worse. But I'm also curious as to, the prison industrial complex's role in all of this, and like, I know it's not the same in Mexico and in Central America as it is in the United States in terms of the, just how punitive and how ridiculous it truly is, and unnecessary, with the sort of smallest amounts of drugs that are, that people traffic or sell. But yeah, like what is the function of the prison system in Central America? Because I know you visited prisons, you visited with hardened criminals and murderers who are armed while they're in, while they're locked up. They're running gangs while they're locked up. And also the prison system, as you document, has contributed to the creation of gangs, as in with the Mara Salvatrucha, which is a Salvadoran gang, and the massive amounts of deportations from LA prisons back to El Salvador only further grew their ranks. So when it comes to the punitive stuff, let's forget the drug war and the legalization stuff. But yeah, like what are the holes in that, and how does that differ in Europe, in South America, Latin America?
Yeah, it's kind of a double tragedy that you see, in that there's a lot of very violent murderers on the street here, and I'm talking about violent criminals who've committed multiple rapes, murders, massacres, some bad people, and there's impunity, and they're on the street. So you get some places like Guerrero State, one of the worst, where like if you commit a murder, you've got about a 1 in 50 chance of being caught doing it. So on one side, you've got that, like a lot of, the complete failure to really just, deliver justice. On the other side, you've got these kind of brutal prisons, and a lot of, sometimes innocent people, some horrific cases of innocent people get railroaded, some terrible miscarriages of justice here. And yeah, the prisons are crazy. The one in Honduras, one of the ones in Honduras I went into, was one of the craziest prisons I've been into, where I went in and you have these fighting dogs in the prison, and I started walking in, and it's like a really crowded prison, and I started feeling like this kind of thing at my leg, and there's like these really vicious fighting dogs that the prisoners have themselves to have like these like dog fights. And I was like, what's that dog called? And they were like, that dog's called Sicario, that like killer, that. And then the girlfriends are in the prison with them, or the wives in the prison with them.
Yeah.
And then there are people there, openly carrying like Uzis on their chest and with grenades and stuff, and like real brutal violence. I mean, crazy violence happening in there. I mean, without being too graphic, I mean, there was there's a mural of a prison leader there who'd been subsequently murdered. But somebody challenged his power in the prison, and he decapitated them and like threw the head over the wall. And so this kind of brutality happening, and people living with that brutality. So you've got a kind of double tragedy. Yeah, I mean, it's not working. The problem is with a lot of this stuff is loads of it's not working, but I don't know, what is the solution? How do you make this better? And it's like, you kind of say it's a tragedy of both both people suffering the impunity or really what violent crime means, and that really hurting people, but also people suffering the repression of soldiers coming into their communities and killing people, and like prisons that don't work and are like, you know, sometimes putting innocent people in these prisons.
Right. I mean, and you know, in the ways that we've got legalized bribery through lobbying, you know, in the States, you know, whenever, at least when I was living in Latin America, they were like, well, you guys have legalized bribery. We've got bribery too. It's just not always legal. And I think another thing that is fascinating to me is obviously the political, and, you know, there needs to be the political will, but that piece of it and the ways that, you know, whether it is, I know not every single state is compromised in the way Guerrero was and in the way the mayor of Iguala was, but it was such a perfect example of every single tier of political hierarchy and military hierarchy being involved in this violent, heinous crime, you know, to move drugs. And I guess I'm wondering, you know, what will it take for a country like Mexico to have the political will, considering that cartels also run a lot of money and can make or break someone's political career? And I guess I'm curious also about Manuel López Obrador and what, you know, has he changed the trajectory at all? And how do you, when there's so much, you know, dark money, not dark money, but illegal money. It's not a super PAC here. There's not a, you know, a Sinaloa super PAC, but that'd be funny. But yeah, how politicians are also bought and sold by this entire system.
Yeah, I mean, the corruption goes so deep here. A lot of places it's like state capture, you could call it, or like you know, you start using the word like narco states. I mean, just one example of many of how crazy it is. I was in one city in a border town in Mexico, and we had to talk to the cartel member who was like, he was telling other journalists we were coming into town and not to talk to us. Eventually, we had to talk to him to negotiate the fact we're actually allowed to be in this town and film some stuff. And eventually, we kind of calmed it down with the guy, and he said, "Yeah, you're fine." He goes, "Any problem with the police, you call me." Like, he's above the police, above the local police. So you get kind of levels where you have a local police force and the cartels above them now, kind of running them. And, you know, you've got police commanders who are active cartel members who would teach, you know, training young cartel members how to commit atrocities. And then all the way up, you know, you've got these, you know, crazy stuff where the guy who was really the number two, the kind of main head of the drug war under Felipe Calderon, who we talked about earlier, Genaro Garcia Luna, is currently in prison in the United States on drug trafficking charges. So you got this, you know, this guy. I interviewed him, you know, some years ago. So you're interviewing these people, these cops, these policy makers, and then, you know, a few years later they're in prison for like drug trafficking. So, you know, how can you believe, or how is this state so captured? How do you get out of that? And it's very, very, you know, it's very hard. It's like a kind of, you know, that, what do they call that? The Gordian knot, that knot you can't, it's impossible to undo. So, yeah, how do you find a way out of this? Now, get to the current president, Andres Manuel López Obrador. I've been following him for 20 years.
Yeah.
I've been to his hometown and talked with the guy, you know, the guys he played baseball with as a kid, and kind of followed his career as mayor of Mexico City, and been to like literally hundreds of his events. And I kind of liked his discourse originally, his kind of idea of being, yeah, you've got this mafia of power at the top with all the money, and the rest of the people are left out, and you've got to kind of get rid of corruption and kind of, you know, clean the system. And, you know, it sounded good. Unfortunately, the reality is I don't really see evidence that he's really changing things. An example is that for his party is called Morena Party. For his party, you had somebody running for mayor in the local elections who was literally wanted in the United States on drug trafficking charges.
Wow.
Now, and people say, well, you know, it's like, can't you find somebody else who's not wanted on drug trafficking charges to run for mayor? There might be somebody out there, you know, like, so like, you know, there's still, you know, you still see, and has there been, you know, like real efforts to clean up these places, and and the violence continues. Now it's plateaued. I don't want to blame it all on the current president,
Sure.
but he hasn't got a big solution to this. So yeah, it's very, very tough.
What's going on, Frantifa? If you haven't already, subscribe to this channel right now. Hit that button. And also, you can become a patron and support the show every single week. Get access to bonus episodes and exclusive merchandise. Patreon.com/bitchuation room. Do it.